Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you all. We're super excited to present our latest research on micromobility. If you've been around for a while, we do that every year. We update our perspective on a regular basis, also based on your feedback, of course. So excited to share some insights, at least on how we see the micromobility market evolve. Just for a brief introduction, so my name is Anja. I'm an associate partner with McKinsey. I work almost exclusively with players like you, helping them scale from basically a business idea all the way through IPO or whatever exit you are looking at. And Darius?
And I'm an expert in the MCFM, which is our McKinsey internal think tank for the future of mobility. Anja and me, we are part of a group of 200 colleagues doing nothing else than trying to understand the future of mobility. And in there, I'm specifically responsible for our market modeling, for the market sizing, and also the consumer insights on micromobility. So yeah, we are very happy to be here and to present you our newest insights.
Super. So 3 topics that are hopefully of interest. So first, we just want to share our view on how the markets are evolving, the segments, the regions, what we see in the markets. Also, every year, we basically ask the consumer how they feel about micromobility, the different form factors. So some quite interesting insights there as well. And then lastly, a couple of examples of how we actually partner with players in the micromobility space, as I said, to hopefully build a couple more unicorns in the space over the next couple of years. At the highest level, what do we observe in the market? And I think it's safe to say in recent years, we've definitely seen a period of hypergrowth. So many of you were basically in a making market period, trying to, bring new form factors to the markets, educate your customers, basically establishing business models. At the same time, I think we've seen lots of excitement on the investor side, pouring money into new business models, and also seeing many players expand quite rapidly in markets, across cities and so on. And I think this phase has come a bit to an end, for sure. Excited to see what your view is, but what we think is that at the moment we are entering a new phase. It's still a growth phase, but for sure, it's also a little bit more a consolidation phase of the market. So we'll see over the next couple of years, definitely new winners, new losers in the market. We'll see a new excitement about EBIT. I think in the past, it was a lot about growth. Now investors are looking more at sort of what do EBIT timelines look like? Does everyone have their supply chain under control and so on? And I think also it's safe to say, if you are in the market for raising money, that typically takes a little bit longer. Good news is ticket sizes also get bigger, but I think this is a bit of a sort of a consolidation phase at the moment. And then if you ask us sort of next 5 years, next 7 years, what's ahead for micromobility? I think another very, very exciting phase. We called it for now, or we'll see much more integrated mobility plays. And now what does that mean? I think that means that we'll see, of course, players like you scale. So we're going into the scaling phase for sure. But we'll also see new collaboration types with cities, for instance. I mean, cities are still very much figuring out regulation, how they can go about multimodal mobility and all of that. So that is exciting. And what's also exciting is that players are branching out into adjacent segments. And that depending on your business model, that could be digital, that could also be just employee benefits, basically everything, but for sure a much more broader play across the micromobility value chain. And with that, I'll hand it over to Darius, who is actually the brain behind all the work we do. I'm sure you know that on the knowledge side. So our view on the market.
Thank you very much, Anja. And basically to sum it up what also Anja just said, right? So we do see a restructuring, if you will, on the supply side, but on the demand side, we definitely still see also an increase in terms of trips done, in terms of trip distances done. And that's also what is in the end impacting our market sizes. So what you can see here is our latest forecast for the global micromobility value pools. How we define value pools is typically we try to understand what are the revenues across all players involved, across the entire value chain stack, right? So that typically includes the sales of the vehicles, the aftermarket services, and much more. And what you can see here specifically are the value pools for privately owned and shared scooters, mopeds, and bicycles. And we roughly estimate the market to be at $160 billion today. Thereof, Europe is the leading market with roughly $60 billion, followed by China, by North America, and South Asia. And then what we have also brought with us are these gray bar charts. These gray bar charts should illustrate a bit how we basically forecasted the market for the next 2 years, and then again for 2030 now, and also 1 to 2 years ago. And as you can see, yes, there is a certain dip in 2025. So our short and midterm forecast got a bit more conservative. But if you look at it from a long-term perspective, we are still quite bullish on the market for a couple of trends that I'm going to explain you in a bit. We estimate that the market for micromobility in 2035 will roughly triple as compared to today's market and reach $520 billion. Again, Europe, we expect still to be the leading market with roughly $220 billion, followed by China and again, North America. Why are we so bullish? Maybe to give you also a couple of insights in how we do the market forecast. So what we believe is that it's especially regulation that is on top of the agenda of many cities and countries, right? We have seen many cities in Europe, but also in the US, employing incentives and also measures in order to foster the micromobility evolution. Amongst others, of course, the extension of bicycle lanes. We have seen more and more also purchase subsidies for e-bikes specifically. And on the other hand side, we also see, and that's, I think, very interesting if you follow, so to say, the consumer surveys every year, that consumer adoption is definitely not decreasing, but even increasing. We say that roughly 70% of all consumers globally are willing to integrate micromobility somehow in the future mobility mix. That's quite a massive number, right? And now, what you can also see in that chart is that we are quite bold when we talk about Europe, because here we have seen regulation to be especially also conducive, and also consumer adoption to always be much higher than you have it in other regions in the world. And maybe one last comment also on that page is when you look at these small bubbles above the charts. The small bubbles indicate how many kilometers driven are there by micromobility as compared to the entire mobility mix. And we estimate that already today, around 12% of all person kilometers traveled are traveled via micromobility. So again, this can be a scooter, a bicycle, or a moped. So quite a considerable number. And this number is also expected to increase to roughly 15%. Coming from these global numbers to European figures. So what we did here is we basically deep dived into the European market figures and tried to understand what are the biggest markets in Europe specifically. And it turned out that the market in Europe is quite a concentrated market, right? You can see that the top 5 countries in Europe account for almost 50% of the entire micromobility value pools, with Germany, France, and the UK leading. Germany, for instance, has $12 billion in value pools. How will this evolve until 2035? It's interesting to see that this share, this 50% share, is basically hardly changing. So we still expect that these countries will be the leading countries also in the future, simply because we have seen that regulation is particularly conducive in Western Europe. When we look at the same split, but do not, so to say, segment the European market by country, but by mode. What you can see here is on the left-hand side, this blue big bar chart, indicating that the bicycle, especially the privately owned bicycle, is definitely leading the European market. Roughly 50 billion of the 60 billion in market size is coming from the bicycle. And what is even more interesting is that only, let's say, after 7-8 years of aftermarket implementation, the electric bicycle already accounts for 40% of these value pools. And we do expect that the share of the e-bicycle is even going to increase until 2035. Again, for 2 reasons. One, because regulators push it a lot, right? And especially also because consumers oftentimes prefer the bicycle because it simply addresses more use cases and allows also for longer trip distances as the traditional bicycle does. Maybe one last comment on that page. You can also see the kick scooter showing the biggest growth until 2035. So we ask consumers about the reasons why they like to use kick scooters. It's often the flexibility, right? So people are able to use their kick scooter also on the buses or on the trains, something which is of course not possible with bicycles and mopeds. And that's typically one of the main reasons also why our market forecasts for kick scooters are so optimistic. Now let me turn from our market size forecast to our latest consumer survey insights. A couple of words on the consumer survey. What we do year by year, since I think now 5-6 years, is we ask roughly 28,000 consumers about their willingness to use micromobility, about the typical behavior when using micromobility. And this is, so to say, what comes out year by year. The bicycle is the most preferred micromode. I think it's pretty clear why. It allows for many use cases. It's, of course, a mode which is, especially now through certain purchase premiums, quite affordable. And when you look and ask those consumers who prefer the bicycle about which bicycle type they actually prefer, then it's interesting to see that the city and trekking bicycle is the most preferred one. 41% of those who prefer a bicycle say that they would prefer a city or trekking bike, which of course is again an indication for the fact that people like to use modes which they can integrate into their everyday lives, right? Such as a city bicycle. What I also find interesting about that perspective is that the kick scooter is on the second spot. And that despite the fact that, for instance, a moped, which is ranked much lower, is much more, so to say, cultivated in most mobility cultures and parentheses as the e-kick scooter, but still the e-kick scooter performs pretty well, right? Another survey insight which we looked at is we ask consumers, so to say, who use this particular mode quite often, how they would continue to use this mode in the future. And what you can see here in, so to say, highlighted is the bicycle. And the interesting fact is that amongst those users who already use their bicycle more than once per week, 59% tell us that they want to even increase the usage in the future. Only 8% say that they want to decrease it, right? So that again shows how important the bicycle gets, especially as an everyday mobility mode. And what I find very striking is that if you do now, if you will, like a very simplistic math and simply subtract the ones who want to use it more by the ones who want to use it less, then the bicycle appears to be the definitely clear mode that is going to be used much more in the future. If you compare it, for instance, with a private car, there we see the inverse trend. People who use a private car quite often today want to use it less in the future. What are the top drivers for more cycling? I think that's quite apparent. One, of course, better bike lanes, which basically means a better surface, right? Many people do not use bicycles because they simply feel unsafe. Secondly, of course, safer roads and intersections. Think about, best example here, Amsterdam, the separation of bicycle lanes and therefore the need, so to say, to separate car-driven traffic by bicycle-driven and bicycle-driven traffic. And thirdly, of course, more convenient parking. So we have seen that for many people, the parking situation in many cities is still not sufficient, especially if you go to the US. And therefore, that's also one of the main drivers. Let me continue with another consumer survey insight, which I find personally very interesting. Here we looked specifically at the commuting patterns of bicycle users and owners. And what you can see here is, if you look at the first row, the fact that typically the electric bicycle is used much more often for commuting than the traditional manual bicycle. Not surprising. What is surprising maybe is the fact that especially US consumers use their electric bicycle very often to commute. We found that every US consumer who owns an electric bicycle uses the bicycle for roughly 1.6 trips per day to commute only, right? Secondly, we also saw that if you look specifically at the trip distance, which is covered for commuting, we found that the Europeans are the ones who use their bicycle for the longest trip distances. Every European e-bicycle owner on average uses his or her bicycle for roughly 3,000 kilometers of commuting distance per year, which is quite a lot. And lastly, we also found that it is especially the Chinese and European consumers who own a bicycle and primarily use it for commuting. And then we also looked at a chart. You cannot see here the bar charts, but that's fine, which should indicate how much people are willing to spend on the next bicycle purchase in the future. So what we did is we compared the average price that the consumer paid for the last bicycle purchase and asked people about their intention if they're willing to pay more or less for more or less the same bike type. And it turned out that consumers are willing to spend more, on average 9% more for the next bicycle purchase. Of course, mainly driven by the e-bicycle adoption, which means people start to switch from traditional bicycles to electric bicycles. And then, of course, because of simply increasing prices, so inflation. That being said, I give over to you, Anja.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you see on that page is a little bit our 10 truths about micromobility. We update these on a regular basis for us to keep us honest and also to include your feedback, of course. If we want you to take away a couple of things, I think it's the following. In the mid and long term, we still remain extremely excited about the market. And this is a very, very sizable market. There might be some headwinds or have been headwinds over the last couple of months and maybe even sort of throughout 2024. But again, this is, if you think through cycle, midterm, absolutely excited about this market. The second one is, if you are in the market for becoming a winning player in Europe, you have to win in 5 key countries. And of course, depending on your product and depending on your strategies, that might look different. But essentially, winning in the 5 key markets means winning Europe. And then in terms of form factors, I mean, we call out the electric bicycle here. That's probably one that has been the most robust against all these market headwinds. But in general, of course, the electric e-bike market isn't going anywhere. The biggest segment that is also helping accelerate other segments and other form factors. So I'll let you read through all the other points we have, and we're also happy to, of course, circulate the material if that's of interest. But I wanted to touch upon another very exciting thing, and these are just a couple of examples of how we have in the past worked with players like you. If you think of McKinsey, oftentimes you probably think, okay, they're coming in doing a strategy project for 4 weeks and 8 weeks, and we do that. But basically what Darius and myself do a lot of the time is partnering with players, rolling up our sleeves, helping scale depending on where your needs are. Yeah? And then can look very different, comes in different shapes and forms. Just a couple of examples. I mean, we are very happy to help you with your equity stories. So if you need certain data cuts or views on the market that you just saw, just approach us. And more importantly, we also like to partner in the long term. So here's an example. We partner with players over a period of 3 years all the way through IPO and basically do nothing but sales acceleration. Different ways of partnering we are very happy to discuss, and super flexible in terms of equity arrangements and so on. Some lessons learned of what we think is very important to get right if you want to become one of these winning hyperscalers. I mean, one is there's a lot of scrutiny on your commercial pipeline from an investor point of view. So having a proven order book, doesn't matter if you're sort of going after the consumer, B2B, B2C, having a proven pipeline and showing excitement with your customers is very, very important. Profitability, I mentioned that. Typically for early stage players, that comes with product cost out, but also sort of supply chain procurement. Getting that right is very important. In general, sharpening your equity story, or also just in general, if you're interested in partnering, we are here. And we do that not over a phase of 4 weeks. We are in for the long run. I think you have seen our flyers throughout the building. We just wanted to remind everyone also, we would be super thrilled to have you join our webinar. That's the next one is beginning of July. I mean, we do them on a regular basis, but come join us in July. And also all the data you've seen. We are happy to make that available. We are happy to help you also customize your whatever you need, right? Your equity stories, your growth plans. So do reach out to us. We are here throughout today and tomorrow. And I'm excited to discuss with you. And I think that being said, thanks, Darius. We are here. We are here if you have questions, do approach us. And looking forward to exciting days.
Thank you.